Hey everyone, welcome back to the Code House. Today I'm going to be showing you how to create almost every single input element inside the HTML5 form element that you can use. So you are going to, in the end, create a form that looks like this. Okay, and there are tons of different inputs right here. They're all different. So the first thing is a text input. Then you can go ahead into your password input, and then a checkbox. So check the checkbox, uncheck it, check it again. A radio group, which consists of male, female, or other. And then you have a color picker, which is useful in cases where you want the user to pick a color for some reason. And then you have a date picker, so you can pick a date, and this is default HTML. Doesn't look too bad, the date picker right over here. Then a telephone input, and you have to actually specify a pattern for a telephone input in order for it to actually match a telephone, a sort of telephone number that you want to be valid or invalid. And then you have a, I think this is an email input. So the email input will need to have, so if I submit the form, submit, so please fill out this field. So I have to fill out the telephone field, and it will work if I just do 1, 2, 3, even 1, because there's no validation. We're not passing in any validation into our HTML. And then the next thing is an email. So this won't work. You see, it has default validation at email, and then that's the only way that I'll actually validate. And then you have an image submit button. So I didn't pass any image source, so that's why it doesn't show any image right here. So if you pass in the image source, then actually that image will become the submit button for your form. And then you have a number picker, so you can or a number input, so you can go all the way from 0 to 10. And you see right here that these little controls or arrows that you can use to increase or decrease the number. And you can also increase or decrease the minimum value and the maximum value that you want, so that for any validation that you may want for yourself. So currently I put it, the minimum is 0 and the maximum is 10. And then you have a file input, so if I click this then or this, it'll open up a dialog box in like my file explorer, and then I'll select a file that I want, and it will choose one file. Whichever file I've chosen, it'll upload it to this form. And then the range input allows you to have a range of a minimum and a maximum. So I gave a minimum of 1 of 0. So minimum is always 0. Maximum is 20. That in this case. However, you can change it to be whatever you want. And then in the end, you have a reset input, which will actually reset everything I've done for this form. So when I click this, it erases everything that I've done, sets it back to whatever it was earlier, and then in the end I have the submit input form. So submit the form. So let's go ahead and create this form. Of course, we're not going to be creating any styling, and in the end we just want it to look exactly like this. To do that, we'll open up our code editor. So I'm using Visual Studio Code. If you don't have VS Code or any other code editor, you can go ahead and install VS Code. I suggest that you download Visual Studio Code because it's, first of all, it's free. Second of all, it offers a lot of handy features to developers. And third of all, it's really popular. It's the most popular code editor out there for developers. So for these three reasons, you can go ahead and install VS Code. However, if you have any alternatives that you want to use, you can do so. So pause the video if you haven't already installed VS Code or other code editors, and then download it and then come back. So let's get started. And in VS Code, you have this icon on the top left, the File Explorer, so we can click that, and then you can go ahead and open a folder. So I've done so. And then you'll see this directory and all the different paths and folders that are nested inside that main folder that you've opened. So most likely yours is going to be empty. Mine is not currently. It doesn't matter. You just want to open this icon right here, and you can name it inputs.html. And of course, this is just for practice reasons to make HTML elements much more clear, and also to give you a broad understanding of all the most important HTML inputs. So before we actually put any markup in here, I want to show you how to open this file in your browser. So you just need to open it one time, and the way you do this is right-click on inputs.html, reveal in File Explorer option, and then click the inputs. Click the file name in your File Explorer, and that should create it for you, or that should open it up in the browser for you. And so let's go ahead and put some markup in order to make this web page look more like this. So the first thing I'm going to do is create the HTML5 boilerplate. And this is really easy using Emmet, which is something that's pre-installed in VS Code. It's a handy plugin that allows you to create HTML elements really quickly. So, for example, typing in HTML:5, hitting tab will create this whole HTML document boilerplate for me. So now all I need to do is fill in the title, and then fill in whatever body, whatever content I want inside the body, and then also any links that I may have, not in this case though. So let's erase the title and set it to be inputs. And when I refresh the page, you can see the title of the page is inputs. And then you have your body tag, in which the meat of the code, of the meat of our web page is going to be. So let's go ahead and create the first input. Now, the first input is the text input, the most common input in HTML5. So before I do that, I'm going to actually create a form element. So go ahead and cut out the action attribute. We're not going to look at that. And inside the form, let's go ahead and create the input :text. That should create an input with a type of text, and then we can give it a placeholder to be type in text. And then what you can do is actually give something called a pattern attribute. And what the pattern attribute does, it allows you to specify a pattern using regular expression to validate your input field. So in our case, we want, let's call this name. So type in username, just to make it more clear. And we want a username to have at least 3 characters, and not more, just three characters. They should be letters and numbers, and they should not have more than, more than 20 characters. So what you would do is square brackets and type in A to Z, lowercase, then A to Z capitalized, then 1 to 9, that is 0 to 9. And that's all. And then what we're going to do is, and then we want to require it, make it required. So this means that the form will not be submitted as long as this input is empty or doesn't match this pattern. So the default pattern for text inputs, if it has one character of anything, then it will, and you just give required without the pattern attribute, then it just requires for the input to have one character, can even be a space, and it will submit the form. So in this case, we are only allowing alphabets, capitalized and lowercase, uppercase and lowercase, and then also numbers 0 to 9. And then we're saying the minimum amount is 3, the upper limit is 20, and then we're making it required. And then we're going to give another attribute called the title attribute, which is thus some text that allows for the user to understand what valid patterns will be allowed inside the username. So let's go ahead, and it's going to be usually presented to the user as a tooltip. So let's go ahead and type in, please enter a minimum of 3 characters, maximum 20, and then only alphabets, or only letters and numbers allowed. So now what this will do is actually show the title to the user as a part of the input. So once I type in, one thing we need to do, the second input that we're going to see is the submit input. So the submit or the input type equals submit. So input colon submit will submit the form. Will submit the form of whatever it's in. So you also want to give it a value. And one thing to note, most people do not create submit forms using the input type equals submit. They actually just create a button and with their text inside that they want to be inside the button. And so the value attribute actually specifies whatever text is going to be inside the button. So let's go ahead and give this input a value of submit. And now what we should see is a button right over here that allows us to submit. Now, this will submit the form, but as I said, the required attribute prevents the form from being submitted if this input doesn't, whatever's inside this input doesn't match the pattern that we created using regular expression. So currently it doesn't. So when I refresh the page, I'll refresh the page and submit. It says please fill out this field. Now you can see once I type in, here's the page, submit. So now it does work. So it does, and that's exactly what we want. And 1 letter will not submit it, 2 won't, and 3 won't either. Now 4 will. And this should not work, so that didn't work, and that's good. So now let's go ahead and create our second input, which is the password input. So input colon password, password, and we're not going to give it a name or ID, and we're also not going to give it a pattern. Let's just go ahead and let me show you how it looks like. So BR, Control-C, Control-V. And now, when I refresh the page, I have a password input. And let's go ahead and give it a placeholder of password. And that's it for the password input as well. You can see right here, this is how the password input, it renders differently from the text input because it actually hides the characters that you've typed in. Now, the next thing you want to do is create the input type equals email. So, input email. And the input with email doesn't have a lot of validation. So for example, it just needs something before an at. So you can have one at G, and that will submit it. Once I do this, it will submit it. However, if I just do this, it'll ask me to, I need to give it a required attribute, like that. So even if you specify the pattern attribute, if you don't specify required, then it's not going to be required. So if you give one at G, it will submit. So you actually have a much better validation for emails. So for example, you can search for email validation, Regex, or email validation in HTML5, and you can actually get much better validations. However, this is just the default HTML validation. And then the next thing we are going to do is, and let's give this a placeholder of email. Let's make this required. So once we get this required attribute, and then we are going to create the input type equals telephone. So this is something that's really nice. It allows you to create a telephone input, and we are going to give it a placeholder of telephone number. And then what we actually need to do, okay, so if you look right here and you give it a required attribute, once we put this on the form, what's actually going to happen is once I run this, then this, then this, it's going to submit it right when I type in one number, and that's because I actually need to give in a pattern attribute inside this input type equals tel. So you may wonder, then what's the use of type equals telephone if you actually have to specify the pattern, which is telephone, and I thought that it would actually be something that would have some predefined validation for telephone numbers. However, that's not the case. So the next input that we are going to look at is the input type equals checkbox. And what it is, it's just a checkbox that you can check, uncheck again. So you can actually leave it empty or leave it checked. So there are two possible options. And it's quite a bit different from radio buttons. And the way you create an input type equals checkbox is you give an input type equals checkbox, and then if you want the checkbox to be selected before you even submit, so you have to check the checkbox in order for it to be submitted. For example, I agree to the terms and conditions. You usually want them to agree to the terms and conditions before they actually submit the form or sign up. So you would give the required attribute, which makes it necessary to check it before submitting the form. And then we get to input rate type equals radio. What that is, it's just a radio group, and you have right here 3 different input type equals radios. However, they're all of the same name, which means they're basically part of the same group. And if you're on a radio button and you're part of the same group, you can only be selected by excluding the other ones from being selected. So you can only select one of these at a time. And that's how different it is from checkboxes. Even if you have a checkbox group, I don't know how you would manage that, that you could still select every single one of them without excluding others. So that's the main difference between inputs and radio button, checkboxes and radio buttons. And right here, the example is gender. So you can either be a male or a female, or you can select other. And then let's continue. So what you have next is the input with the range. So input type equals range, and that allows you to create a range input. For example, if you want to create a pricing sort of input, and then you can use the input type equals range. And let's go ahead and do that. So input range, and then let's close it. So if you create the default range input, what will happen is you can just slide it across, so there are no steps, there's no number that's been selected. And then what you want to do is actually you want to actually give it a minimum and maximum. So minimum is going to be 0, right? The maximum is going to be 20. So you don't usually need to give the minimum attribute, I just wanted to show it to you. And now you'll see once I make this range from 0. So if this is 0, I'm going to move it right using my arrow key, and it'll count how many times it goes right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And you can see there's 20 different selections that you can do. And if you say, well, that probably is the default number, let's change it to 50, not 50, that's going to be hard to count, 30, then what will happen is the steps will actually be much smaller, so it'll be smoother once I do right one. So it'll actually take slower steps, smaller steps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So now you can see there's 30. So the next thing I'm going to do is create an input type equals submit, but it's actually going to be input type equals image. So what the input image does, it's something that's really cool, something that you can play around with, something that's really useful in some cases where you want to style your input button as an image, or your submit button as an image. So what you do is give it a source, right? And you can give it an alt. So the alt is submit, right? If the user cannot download the image, then it will then it will show the submit submit alt, and also the file icon sort of thing when you can't display an image, and then you give it a source. So let's go ahead and have a source. So an image that we want, let's see, free images. And let's look at one that's licensable, okay, royalty-free image collections. Okay, so let's copy the image address, and I'm just going to use it over here, okay? So now when I refresh the page, you can see right here, this is the image. You can see it's pretty much what it was earlier. Now when I click it, it will actually submit the form, which is super cool, because if I styled this, this would actually look like a submit button that's styled as an image. So this is actually a submit button that's styled as an image, and this is something that you can use when you don't want to go actually create tons of different styling for just a small button input. You can just give an image as the submit input. So that's something that's really cool. And then the next thing we're going to do is create the input type equals file. So it's exactly what you do. What you think it would do, it's going to allow you to upload a file to this form. And currently, it can only upload one file. So let's go ahead into my pictures, apps. Where's my screenshots? Yeah. And let's take this one right over here. And then you can only choose one file. So if I try to choose another file, such as this one, would actually override it and just choose the second file that I chose. Now, if you want to allow the user to upload multiple files, you give the multiple attribute, and that will allow the user to upload multiple files. So you can upload more than one by selecting these two, or by just uploading, and then you can see it says 2 files. So that's something that you can play around with, and something that you can use in the real world, because image upload is a really important part of most websites. For example, currently in YouTube, video upload is the important factor. Other things like Unsplash.com, they have their own image upload process so that they could create, so that they can upload free images to their website. So that's something that you need to look into, because a default form does not submit these files right away. You need to give the type of a form to be encoding, multi-part form data /form data. And I'm not going to talk about what this is or anything. It's just a type that will allow this, these files to be passed to the backend. And then in your backend, you actually need some libraries to actually handle these files in order to upload them to your database or to your image, to your cloud image storage system. So what we're going to do next is actually use the input type equals, let's see what it was. Let's go here, and if I scroll down, so you can see actually a list of all the different types of inputs that you can use. And this time I'm going to show you what the input type equals number is. So you can give a placeholder. So you can give a minimum attribute. As I said, you can. So by default, it has. You can do infinity. Go until infinity. So look right here. You can go up as much as you want, down as much as you want. However, if you want to change it, however you want to have an input that only allows you to, from a range, so it's a minimum and a maximum, then you would give the min attribute and the max attribute respectively to specify what the minimum number you want it to be and the maximum number you want it to be. So in this case, I've made it 0 and 20, and when I refresh the page, you can see right here the input becomes smaller, and also I can only go down until 0 and up until 20. So that's something you can look at, and it should provide enough validation for you for your limits. And then the last thing that we're going to look at is the input type equals hidden. It is a hidden input, and the alternative to using an input type equals hidden would be using CSS to display it, to give it a display none, or to hide it from the page. And it's something more of using your front-end JavaScript. Usually you give it a value based on something happening. So for example, whichever route that you've come to, then your JavaScript file will change the value of this input to something, and then it will be sent back to, it will be passed to the backend through the form when the form is submitted, and then the data will be received, and they can act based on that. And one example of doing this would be using a cart. So in Ajax, if you want to send this form, for example, when you click Add to Cart, and that button, the form that the button is in, that the button Add to Cart is in, should also have an input, can also have an input type equals hidden with a value of whatever ID the product has, so that it can be added to the cart. And that's just one example. So let's go ahead and create. Let's go ahead and create one last input called input type equals reset. And what that does, it resets the form to its defaults. So you can see right over here, reset form to default. This is really fun in settings. For example, if you want to reset it back to whatever it was before the user changed it, then that's what this reset form to defaults would do. So when I reset it, everything, when I click it, everything is reset back. This is something that can be useful when you don't want to use any JavaScript or anything to reset everything back to what it was. Just put this input type equals reset inside the form and it will reset it back. However, be careful because it could lead to some losses in data if someone typed in everything they wanted and then the user expected to just reset one field or anything or something, then what would happen is everything that they typed in would be lost and they would have to type it all over again, which is gross for the user. And also that's pretty much it for today. Please subscribe, turn on notifications, and like the video. I hope this video helped you understand the different types of inputs that are out there that you can use inside your next HTML form that you create. So play around with these, and as I said in my previous videos on HTML, the only way you can learn HTML is by experience. So go ahead and type all of this in, create different text inputs, passwords, telephone number, telephone inputs, validation. So using Regex, something that you should learn. It's pretty helpful, and it's something that will be part of you to help you even in backend. Sometimes you use regular expression to validate data and everything. So it's something that's pretty important. So if you practice with the pattern attribute, you should be good to go for regular expressions. And so as I said, subscribe, turn on notifications, and like the video. And that's it. Bye for now.